Hello, church. Good to be back with you again as we continue our study in Daniel. This is lesson chapter 9. Now, today we're going to look at understanding the Jehovah Witnesses and what they do with Daniel chapter 4. Now, before we get there and understand how they view Daniel chapter 4, we're going to learn a little bit about their history and a little bit more about some of the doctrines and how these things came about. And then this will bring us to Daniel chapter 4. So you just bear with me for a minute so we can get there, okay? Because we need to understand, when we go out and evangelize, we need to understand their doctrines and their beliefs, where they come from. This is going to help us to better have conversation with people when we know where they're coming from. Okay, so we are very familiar with their church buildings, the Kingdom Hall, as they call it. They are in most towns. We're also very familiar with them. They've probably come and knocked on your door. They're very evangelistic, and most people tell me that when they come, they just kind of politely slam the door in their face and they don't want to talk to them. I want to get you to the point where you do talk to them, that we can understand them, and we can lovingly talk to them and have a conversation about their beliefs and their religion. Okay? Now, here's our memory verse, and this is going to help us. This is the same memory verse we had last week when we looked at the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And what does it say here in Ephesians 4:15? Let's read this together. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will in all things grow up in Him who is the head, that is Christ. So when we go out and we speak the truth, and we must speak the truth, this truth of God's Word, we must do it in love. Now, if we cannot understand that, if we don't have that down in our lives yet, how to communicate with somebody in love, then I would suggest don't go. And wait till you develop that love, then go out there and have these conversations with our friends. All right. So let's learn about their history and a little bit about a couple of their doctrines. We couldn't even come close to discussing all of them today. So here's their history. The Jehovah Witnesses originated as a branch of the Bible student movement, which developed here in the United States in the 1870s. Among followers of Christian Restoration minister, his name was Charles Taze Russell. Russell lived between 1852 and 1916. Now, Bible student missionaries were sent to England in 1881, and the first overseas branch was opened in London in 1900. The group took on the name International Bible Students Association, and by 1914 it was also active in Canada, Germany, and Australia, and other countries. The movement split into several rival organizations after Russell's death in 1960, with one led by Russell's successor. And who was this? This is Joseph Judge Rutherford, retaining control of both his magazines, The Watchtower, and the legal and publishing corporation, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania. So here's their leaders. First you had Charles Russell over here, and then you had Joseph Rutherford. And now after Rutherford's passing, it basically developed into what we know here in New York City, New York here in the United States, as the Watchtower. And this is their building, and this is where they operate out of and do a lot of their printing, and send out tracts, and come up with a lot of their beliefs and doctrines. Now, under Rutherford's direction, the International Bible Students Association introduced significant doctrinal changes that resulted in many long-term members leaving the organization. The group regrew rapidly, particularly in the mid-1930s with the introduction of new preaching methods. In 1931, the name Jehovah Witnesses was adopted, further cutting ties with Russell's earlier followers. Substantial organizational changes continued as congregations and teaching programs worldwide came under centralized control. Further refinements of its doctrines led to, what do we have? The prohibition of blood transfusions by members. So if you remember Jehovah's Witness, you can get a blood transfusion. Okay. The abandonment of the cross. Okay. So they get away from crosses. They don't believe in the cross. They don't believe Jesus was crucified on a cross. They believe it was a stake or a tree, but not a cross. So that's another big deal with them. They also reject Christmas and birthday celebrations. So their members do not celebrate either one of these things. They can't have individual birthday parties. And the view of the biblical Armageddon, this global war by God that will destroy the wicked and restore peace on earth. And this is going to bring us into one of their major doctrines, and we're going to see that in this lesson today. So here's their governing body. You'll see Jehovah God at the top, but Jesus underneath. And they do not believe that Jesus is God. We don't have time to go through that doctrine today, but that's a big one with these people. This is their these are the governing body, and they rule again out of New York. I think these same guys are in place, but they might have had a few changes since then. And here's another one of their doctrines, or helping to form their doctrine, is they were influenced by the pyramidology, okay, the pyramids. Theories of John Taylor and Charles Piazzi Smith, Nelson Barber, and Charles Russell taught the Great Pyramid of Giza. Okay, so the pyramids over there in Egypt, they contained what? Prophetic measurements in pyramid inches that pointed to a couple of years. 1874, this is AD, and 1914 AD. Russell viewed the Great Pyramid as God's stone witness and prophet. So this is God's prophet. These are his measurements. They're found within this pyramid, and this has a lot to do with how he comes up with his math. And in fact, this is Charles Taze Russell's tombstone. It's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And if you'll notice, there is a cross on there. So you can see that that is something that has changed with the Jehovah's Witness, because now they would not use such a thing. So again, when we deal with the denominational world, we see a lot of doctrinal changes over the years. For the Jehovah's Witness, this is one of them. All right, so this is going to bring us to the book of Daniel. And this was important. So stay with me here. Arriving at the year 1944. So this is a big year for the Jehovah's Witness. And they take it from this verse out of Daniel. Chapter 4, verse 23. 7 times. 7 times. So when we go through Daniel chapter 4, look for this verse that says 7 times. And they will connect that, the point, to 1914. Okay? Now, who are we dealing with here? When we get to the book of Daniel. Because we've kind of bounced around, we've hit a lot of different chapters, so I want us to really focus in and know who we are dealing with. When we got to Daniel chapter 2 in our past studies, because remember, this is study number 9, we looked at King Nebuchadnezzar. And he's with the Babylonian Empire, okay? And he had this dream of this great statue, and there's 4 different parts, there's 4 different kingdoms here, and he is the head of gold. That's who we're going to focus on today. So stay with King Nebuchadnezzar. All right. Now, God has been working in the book of Daniel on this guy right here. He started out with Daniel chapter 2. He's got this great statue. It was a terrible dream. He couldn't figure it out. And finally, Daniel comes and interprets the dream for him and tells him what the dream was. Okay, so that moves King Nebuchadnezzar. And you read the end of chapter 2. Sounds like Nebuchadnezzar's there. He's going to be a follower of God. But as so many people do, he goes back to his old ways. And in Daniel chapter 3, they build a huge idol. And they are worshiping this idol. And then what do we find out? We find out that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they are followers of God. They're Israelites, right? They're there because of slavery, just like Daniel, and they refuse to worship this, and so they stoke up this huge fire and throw them in. And guess what? They're not burned up. They don't even smell like smoke when they come out. Well, that moves King Nebuchadnezzar. Going, whoa, wait a minute. You guys didn't bow down to this idol, so I want to follow your God. And so, the end of chapter 3, it sounds like he's there. He gets it. He gets who God is. But again, just like many people, he regresses again. And now we come to chapter 4. And this is where we're going to see him eat cattle like grass. Again, what is God doing? He's trying to get this guy's attention. And I did a sermon on this and used all 3 of these chapters, and I entitled it Coming to God. Coming to God. And that's the process of King Nebuchadnezzar. That's going to bring us to Daniel chapter 4. When we get into Daniel chapter 4 and read of this story, okay, about him eating grass, I want us to make sure that we understand the context. Context is so important. So watch the context of this chapter. Okay. So here's King Nebuchadnezzar. Got his great city of Babylon he's built, and he's so full of pride. And the problem with King Nebuchadnezzar is, just like so many of us, he has a pride problem. Watch what God's going to do. Verse 4. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at my home in my palace, contented and prosperous. Contented and prosperous. There we go. I had a dream that made me afraid. As I was laying in bed, the images and visions that passed through my mind terrified me. So I commanded all the wise men of Babylon be brought before me to interpret the dream for me. So we're back to another dream again, right? Just like Daniel chapter 2. When the magicians, the enchanters, the astrologers, the diviners came, I told them the dream, but they couldn't interpret it for me. Finally, Daniel came into my presence, and I told him the dream. He is called Belteshazzar, after the name of my God, and the spirit of the holy gods is in him. So he changes Daniel's name. So here's Nebuchadnezzar, and he has this dream. And this dream is going to bother him so terribly. Okay? I said, Belshazzar, chief of the magicians, I know that the spirit of the holy gods is in you, and no mystery is too difficult for you. So remember, he's already interpreted a dream for him over chapter 2. So here's my dream. Interpret it for me. These are the visions I saw while laying in my bed. I looked, and there before me stood a tree in the middle of the land. Its height was enormous. The tree grew large and strong, and its tops touched the sky. It was visible to the ends of the earth. Its leaves were beautiful, its fruit abundant, and on it was food for all. Under it, the beasts of the field found shelter, and the birds of the air lived in its branches. From it, every creature was fed. So, big tree, right? But what's going to happen? What's going to happen in this dream is this tree is going to get cut down. And what's going to happen here is King Nebuchadnezzar, because he is so filled with pride, his kingdom is going to be taken away. In the visions I saw while laying in my bed, I looked, and there before me was a messenger, a holy one coming down from heaven. He called in a loud voice, cut down the tree, trim off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the animals flee from under it, and let the birds from its branches. But let the stump and its roots, bound with iron and bronze, remain in the ground, in the grass of the field. So here's King Nebuchadnezzar. And what we're going to find is that King Nebuchadnezzar is going to be brought down low. He is going to be humbled. And that's what God has to do with all of us, doesn't he? The pride has to go away. And God is going to work in this man's life to take away that pride. And he's given him this vision, this dream. Let him be drenched with the dew of heaven, and let him live with the animals among the plants of the earth, and let his mind be changed from that of a man, and let him be given the mind of an animal, until 7 times pass for him. There's that word, 7 times. But notice here that this dream has turned into, the focus has turned into what? A hymn. Him, him, his, him. We're dealing with King Nebuchadnezzar here, right? Until 7 times pass by. Verse 17. The decision is announced by messengers. The holy ones declare the verdict, so that the living may know that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men, and gives them to any one he wishes, and sets over them the lowliest of men. Okay, God's going to try to humble this guy, right? So this is a dream that I, King Nebuchadnezzar, had. Now, Belteshazzar, tell me what it means. For none of the wise men in my kingdom can interpret it for me. But you can, because what? Because the spirit of the holy gods is in you. See, he's not quite there yet. He's not quite there yet. Then Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, was greatly perplexed for a time, and his thoughts terrified him. So the king said, Belteshazzar, do not let the dream or its meanings alarm you. Belteshazzar answered, My lord, if only the dream applied to your enemies, and its meanings to your adversaries. But it's not about your enemies. It's not about your adversaries. The tree you saw, which grew large and strong, with its top touching the sky, visible to the whole earth, with beauty of the leaves and abundant fruit, providing food for all, giving shelter to the beasts of the field, and having nesting places in its branches for the birds of the air. You, O king, are that tree. You have become great and strong. Your greatness has grown until it reaches the sky, and your dominion extends to the distant parts of the earth. You, O king, saw a messenger, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, Cut down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump bound with iron and bronze and the grass of the field. While its roots remain in the ground, let him be drenched with the dew of heaven. Let him live like the wild animals. Until when? Until 7 times pass by for him. So, who is this? Who's going to eat grass like a cattle? It's going to be him. It's going to be King Nebuchadnezzar. God is going to take his kingdom away, and he's going to go out and live like a wild animal. In fact, do you know that if you go to Babylonian history, there is a period of years that King Nebuchadnezzar just disappears. Just nothing said about him. And then all of a sudden, one day, he just shows back up in history. It matches perfectly with what's happening here. Daniel tells about what happened with the guy. So verse 24 says, This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree that the Most High has issued. Against who? Stay with the context. Against my lord the king. That's who this is talking about. That's the context of this chapter. Now, what did we learn last week with the Seventh-day Adventists? Context is important. Stay with the context. Here's the context. Verse 25. You will be driven away from the people, will live with the wild animals. You will eat grass like cattle, be drenched with the dew of heaven. 7 times will pass by for you. There it is, until you, what? Acknowledge that the Most High is sovereign over the kingdoms of men. He gives them to anyone he wishes. The command to leave the stump of the tree with its roots means that your kingdom will be restored to you when? When you acknowledge that heaven rules. Then I'll give your kingdom back. Therefore, O king, be pleased to accept my advice. Renounce your sins by doing what is right, and your wickedness by being kind to the oppressed. it may be that then your prosperity will continue. So that's the context of this chapter. Okay? Now, in this chapter, this is what's going to happen to the guy, and then eventually he's going to get his act together and he's going to acknowledge that God is God. There you go. That's what God was after, and that's the context of this chapter. Here's the question. What are the Jehovah Witnesses? How do they handle Daniel chapter 4? Would you like to see what they do with this chapter? We read its context, right? They believe the 7 times in Daniel chapter 4 verse 23 equals 2,520 literal years and points to the year 1914 AD. Wow, that's quite a stretch to take 2 words 7 times and come up with that. Well, this is how they produce that equation. So you all have handouts. Look at your handouts and you'll see how they put this together. They take the 7 times in Daniel chapter 4, turn it into a math equation. Here's the equation. 7 times 360. Where do they get the number 360? The way they produce the number 360 is by taking the days of a Jewish calendar. Okay? So there's less days in a Jewish calendar than there is in our calendar. Okay? Using Revelation 11:2, verse 3, 12:6, and 14 to support their view. So 1 year equals 360 days. Okay? Then they turn to 360 days and make them into years. And they use a verse over here in Ezekiel 4:6, Numbers 14:34 in support of their view. So 7 times 360 equals what? 2,520 years. Next, they'll use a starting time for this equation. And what year do they grab at? 607 BC. Believing that this was when the Babylonian Empire destroyed Israel and the temple. So the kingdom was being taken away. Okay? Well, we're not talking about Israel's kingdom being taken away. In the context, we're talking about King Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom being taken away. Okay? But they love context, and this is what they believe. Now, even their dates are wrong, because it wasn't until 586 BC that Jerusalem was destroyed. So their years are even off. But that doesn't matter because they've got to get these numbers right to make everything work. So after you take the 607 BC, add 2,520 years to it, it produces the year 1914. You see that? Now, what in the world happened in 1914 besides the beginning of World War I? Well, what happened in 1914 is, according to their beliefs, Jehovah entrusted rulership over mankind to his own son, Jesus Christ. So he hands everything over to his son, glorified in the heavens. And they use Daniel chapter 7, verse 13 and 14 in support of this view. According to them, this is the year Jesus started ruling. Huh. That's interesting. Sit in my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. When did Jesus start ruling? There's a difference here, isn't there? That happened when Jesus went back to heaven and was glorified and sat at his right hand of the Father, right? But they say it happened in 1914. Big difference. And see, what do? They're saying that this is when the kingdom is being restored. So here's a little chart. Okay, you can see that 607 BC all the way to 1914. This is when Jesus starts to rule. Now, they also teach that initially the organization taught that the battle of the great day of God Almighty, Armageddon, would end in 1914. So not only does Jesus start to rule, but there's going to be this end of this great battle, Armageddon. Now, every kingdom of the world would be overthrown in 1914, which was God's date, not for the beginning, but for the end of the times of trouble. So this is it. No more wars, no more nothing. Everything's going to end. And the Jehovah Witness was pointing to this. 1914. Isn't that amazing? That's when World War I started, which was the whole world going to war, right, with each other. Not the end of the wars, but it started a huge war. Big difference here. Then it says, we consider, and this is what the Jehovah Witnesses teach here, that it was established truth that the final end of the kingdoms of the world would fall, and the full establishment of the kingdom of God will be accomplished by the end of AD 1914. And that's where in the Watchtower, right? The time is at hand, page 99. Okay, so it's all documented. The battle of the great day of Armageddon Almighty, Revelation 16:14, which will end in AD 14 with the complete overthrow of Earth's present rulership, is already commenced. And there's their books that it's cited in. And then they say, can it be delayed until 1914? Our readers are writing to know if there may be a mistake in the 1914 date. They say they do not see how present conditions can last so long under the strain. We see no reason for changing the figures, nor could we change them if we would, right? They are, we believe, God's dates, not ours. But bear in mind that the end of 1914 is not the date for the beginning, but the end of the time of trouble. There it is, Watchtower, 15th July, 1894, page 226. All documented. Wait a minute. What happens? What happens is they've got to modify things because guess what? Jesus didn't return and the world of trouble didn't end. So they've got to modify their predictions. So they go over here to 1925 now. And it says by the 1919 and 20, the society began looking to the year 1925 as a date for the visible signs of Armageddon's approach. The Watchtower taught that the year 1925 was more clearly taught in the Bible than 1914. Do you see this? They are changing their doctrine. Watchtower President Joseph Rutherford claimed that as a sign that Armageddon was imminent, God would resurrect Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and all the faithful mentioned in Hebrews 11 in the year 1925. They actually believed and taught that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was going to come back to this earth. In fact, they actually started building them a house for them to live in. Just saying what they believe, what they taught, okay? So the date 1925 is even more distinctly indicated by the scriptures because it is affixed by law God gave to Israel. Viewing the present situation in Europe, one wonders how it will be possible to hold back the explosion much longer, and that even before 1925, the great crisis will be reached and probably passed. Watchtower, 1st September 1922. Okay? Wait a minute. They had to change their prediction. Say it with me again. That's right. Okay? Then in 1914 begins the last generation before Armageddon, the 36 intervening years since 1914. Instead of postponing Armageddon, okay, because the years are moving now. Watch what year this is, 1950 that they write this. Have only made it nearer than most people think. Do not forget, this generation shall not pass away till these things be fulfilled. Oh, look what they're doing. They need to modify. So what they do is they leave the book of Daniel now, and they go grab a verse in Matthew, take that out of context, pull it over here, and make it say, this generation will not pass away. They need that phrase. So now they're focused on the generation of 1914. That Armageddon's not going to come and end until this generation of 1914 dies out. Oh, so it wasn't 1914 that the end was going to come. It was while that generation lived and then died, then it's going to come. Okay, all right, we got it. So, as early as mid-1960s, the Watchtower had strongly suggested that the 1914 generation would end by the fall of 1975. They based the 1975 prediction in part on their year for a day theory and the fact that Adam and Eve were created in the year, this is what they believe, 4026. This anticipation was seen to be particularly true because some of those who witnessed the events of 1914 would probably still be alive in 1975. Thus, the 1914 generation theory helped prove the 1975 Armageddon theory. So now they're pointing to 1975. This is when everything is going to come to an end. Okay, let's see. Well, so what they did was this is May 15th, 1984. Okay, and they had to modify again. Now 1975 has gone away. In fact, they lost over 1 million members that year when the end didn't come in 1975. A bunch of people left, but then they rebounded, and then they started growing more. So they modified it again, and they took a picture here of people who actually worked with the Watchtower. Okay, they took a picture. All these people were alive in 1914, and they showed, and they're saying, look, before they die out, the end's going to come. And yet on this chart, you will see when every one of these people died, and guess what? They're all dead now. The end didn't come. Again, one more time that they keep changing and changing and changing their theologies. All coming from the book of Daniel. All coming from two simple words, 7 times. That's astonishing. Okay? In fact, there are all kinds of predictions that they had. They moved from just all kinds of different things, right? Here's a list, and literally they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of predictions. Do you want to know how many of them have come true? 0. They have a track record of accuracy of 0%. Not one prediction that they have ever predicted, given a date for, has ever come true. And they have hundreds of them. And yet, people continue to follow. Isn't that amazing? So, what is that? Well, that's false prophecy. Would you like to see what the Watchtower says about false prophecy? Well, let's see what they say. So this is a publication. Watch down here at the bottom. This is Watchtower, May 1930, page 154 and 155. Watch what they say when somebody prophesies falsely. Since the Bible was completed and the inspiration is no longer necessary, the true prophet is one who is faithfully proclaiming what is written in the Bible. But it may be asked, how are we to know whether one is true prophet or a false prophet? There are at least 3 ways by which we can positively decide. Number 1, if he's a true prophet, his message will come true, and it will come to pass exactly as prophesied. If he's a false prophet, his prophecy will fail to come to pass. And then what do? This rule is laid down by God himself through Moses as follows. Now they're going to quote from the book of Deuteronomy. Watch what it says. If thou say in thy heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has spoken? When a prophet speaketh in the name of the Lord, if the thing follow not, nor come to pass, that is a thing that the Lord has not spoken. But the prophet has spoken presumptuously. Deuteronomy 18:20-21. So if it doesn't come to pass, it didn't come from the Lord. And then they skip over to Deuteronomy 13:5, and it says, that prophet shall be put to death because he has spoken to turn you away from the Lord your God. So what are they saying? If you prophesy falsely, and it doesn't come true, it didn't come from God, and then you ought to be stoned to death. That's what it said in the law. That's what it said in Deuteronomy. And they're quoting that right in their own book. Now we're going to go to Awake. This is another publication they have, October 8th, 1968. True, there have been those who have predicted an end of the world. They did, didn't they? Yeah. Even announcing a specific date. Some have gathered groups of people with them and fled to the hills or withdrawn into their houses, waiting for the end. Yet nothing happened. The end did not come. They were guilty of false prophesying. Why? What was missing? Let's see what was missing. Missing was a full measure of evidence required in the fulfillment of Bible prophecy. Missing from such people were God's truths and the evidence that he was guiding and using them. That's what was missing. Have these guys predicted the end? They have. They started back. In fact, they even started before 1914. They had a couple of years in the 1800s. It didn't happen then. It didn't happen then. Then they went to 1914. Then they went to 1925. Then they had to modify the whole thing. Then they went to the year 1975. Then they had to modify again. Then they had to move it. Well, as soon as these people die, now they're all dead. And it just goes on and on and on. Now watch what it says in the Watchtower, April 1972. Watch what it says. So does Jehovah have a prophet to help them? To warn them of dangers and to declare things to come? He had a prophet to warn them. This prophet was not a man, but was a body of men and women. It was a small group of footstep followers of Jesus Christ, known at that time as International Bible Students. Today, they are known as the Jehovah's Christian Witnesses. Of course, it's easy to say that this group acts as a prophet of God. It's another thing to prove it. And the only way this can be done is to review the record. What does it show? This is their writing. Can I ask you, what does it show? What does it show? It shows that everything they said, every prediction, every theology never came to pass. Not one time. Conclusion. Conclusion is this. By sharing this information in love, it may just cause them to question what they have been taught. And that question may push them so down that it may just knock them over and just resonate in their minds and go, man, this just isn't right. And that might bring them to want to know the truth. It might just put a doubt in their mind that everything they've been taught is false. What did Jesus say in John chapter 8, verse 31 and 32? The truth will set you free. I know this was a lot. I'm going to have to go probably leave a little bit of this information out Sunday morning, but I read it all to you today. It's a lot to swallow. But look, guys, we've got people out here that are taking the Bible and twisting it, mangling it, taking it out of context, making it say something the Bible never intended to say. They're leading people off in groups over here and groups over there, and they're getting away from the truth of God's Word. I hope that we learn these lessons for two things. One is that we never do that we make sure that we don't use the Bible to make it say whatever we want it to say, and then take people and guide people in the wrong direction. And then second of all, that we learn this so that we can better understand the Jehovah Witnesses, understand what they've been taught, and then lovingly and kindly show them. Let's look at how you actually use the Bible and how you stay with context. And it will show that what they believe, what they were taught, is not what the Bible teaches. May God bless you in this endeavor. Pray for them. And I'll be praying for you as you continue to go out and reach the lost. Hope to see you real soon. We'll see you next time. We're going to get into Daniel chapter 9 next week. Hope this wasn't too much for you. Hang in there. Thanks. See you next time.